Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Tax Committee, and especially thank you to the staff for their hard work on this bill. As you heard Senator Nelson and Senator Weber go into detail on the bill, there is a lot of detail work in there, and so we appreciate all they do. There are some good items in this bill, items that we can all agree on. Many of the conformity items that Senator Nelson mentioned, we can all agree on because they do help small businesses. I want to especially talk about the exclusion for discharge of mortgage indebtedness because that will help Minnesotans who lost their home due to foreclosure. And we know it's been a challenging 2 years, and so we feel that this helps them. The K-12 credit income threshold increase and the K-12 subtraction increase will help some families. The angel investment credit, the historic tax credit, the R&D credit, and the new market tax credits all will help, as Senator Nelson said, economic development and will create jobs. Creating jobs and economic development is good, but we also need to ensure that we have educated workers to fill those jobs. Senator Nelson, Senator Weber, and Senator Rest had a lot of conversations with advocates in cities to resolve concerns and put in guardrails on the affordable housing proposals. The 4D provision and another affordable housing provision in this bill could go a long way to preserve and increase affordable housing throughout our state. The tax increment finance and local sales provisions will address local issues in local communities. These are all good provisions. But there are other provisions that I have questions and concerns about. The Social Security provision does not help all retirees. Minnesotans have told us that they want paid family leave, paid family and medical leave. And this bill does give small companies a tax credit if they provide that paid leave. It gives them a tool, but it doesn't put in guardrails or give criteria for what is required. Do companies that offer this have to have a minimum length of that leave to qualify for the credit? Do they get the same credit regardless of the amount of leave? So do they get the same credit if they give leave for 8 hours, 8 days, or 8 weeks? There's still some questions that we need answers to. That provision, if the fine line and those insurance policies is written good and written so that it does help employees, could help those employees. But that's just for companies with 50 or less employees. There's several small businesses that are 50 to 100 employees that don't qualify for that. And if they don't have any other way to provide paid family and medical leave, that doesn't help those employees. This bill will help some Minnesotans, but it doesn't help all Minnesotans. This is what I've heard referred to as a historic tax bill. We have a historic surplus. We should be helping more people. We should be helping all Minnesotans with this bill. This bill spends over $8.6 billion in the next 3 years. $8.6 billion. That is historic. But I also question if it's responsible, especially if it doesn't help all Minnesotans. It does not provide relief to over 500,000 Minnesotans. They pay taxes, many of them work, they just don't make enough to pay income taxes, so they do not get the relief in this bill. We've heard many times in the last few weeks, as other budget bills were discussed here on the Senate floor, that we couldn't include this amendment, that we couldn't fund this proposal because it wasn't a budget year. We can't address the deficits many schools are facing because it isn't a budget year. We can't provide job training or fund more learn-to-earn programs because it isn't a budget year. And we can't fund more school counselors or provide more mental health assistance to our students. They have had historic upheaval in school in the last 2 years, but we can't help them because it isn't a budget year. That's what we've heard here on the Senate floor. But this bill is making budget decisions that will impact Minnesotans and Minnesota for years to come. Budget decisions that are not sustainable. The spending in this bill, and it is spending, brings us close to a structural deficit before we add in inflation. It doesn't matter if the spending is in a budget bill or a tax bill. It is still spending. And as history has shown, if we do not spend wisely, we will end up in deficits. If we go back to 1999, I wasn't here, but some of you were. News stories talked about the historic $4 billion surplus. Governor Ventura and the legislature made several permanent tax cuts. In 2001, news stories called those tax cuts historic. They said it was one of the largest tax cuts in the country. 2 years later, in 2003, Minnesota had a $4 billion deficit. The legislature spent the next 10 years dealing with those deficits. They cut local government aid and county program aid, impacting communities and property taxes throughout the state. They cut and shifted school funding. They squeezed healthcare programs for our elderly and disabled, our most vulnerable. Dealing with those deficits was tough work. It was tough work in 2013 when the legislature fixed those structural deficits. And we've been lucky to have projected surpluses since then. We have a choice here today. We can learn from the past, we can be responsible, we can be strategic, and we can help everyone. When we heard portions of this bill earlier, Senator Klein mentioned that $1 billion of these tax cuts go to the top 20% of wage earners. $500 million go to the top 13% of wage earners. And $20 million is spent on Social Security income recipients who make over $500,000 a year. This bill focuses on tax cuts for businesses and the wealthy. Earlier this week, news stories reported that a former CEO from a large Minnesota publicly traded company realized $142 million in the last year. So he got bonuses and stock options that he cashed out, $142 million. That was a $100 million increase from his 2020 $42 million that he received. That company also is doing really well. Their stock has grown 1,000%, over 1,000% since 2011. Their year-end profit in 2021 was up 12%, and their profits were $17.3 billion. That corporation is doing okay. That former CEO is doing okay. I'm glad they're doing okay. I want Minnesotans and Minnesota companies to be prosperous. But I don't think they need a tax cut. A budget lays out our priorities. And this bill says your priorities The Minnesota Senate GOP priorities are tax cuts for the wealthy. You're not addressing the cost of college tuition. We've read about it in the paper recently. That's going up. You're not reducing broad property tax relief for renters and homeowners. And you're not reducing the special education cross-subsidy. We are hearing from that. We are hearing from parents and school districts all across the state that they need more help for their schools. They need more help for their students. But this bill is tax cuts for the wealthy. We could be strategic, balanced, and learn from the past, and provide relief for all Minnesotans. There still is time to do that. We can do better so all Minnesotans, no matter where they live or what they look like, can be successful.